his very presidency still startles because it's real, and the reality TV part is both a joke and a truism. Historians have long debated how much the president reflects the country, or the country comes to reflect the president. Those words come from the new book, Mr. Trump's Wild Ride, the thrills, chills, screams, and occasional blackouts of an extraordinary presidency, by my next guest, Major Garrett, the chief White House correspondent for CBS News and host of the CBS podcast, The Takeout. Some of you probably know Major Garrett from his previous place of employment, which I won't name out of professional courtesy. Major, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you for the first time.
Well, it's great to talk to you, and there's no reason to hide that. I worked at Fox for 8 years, and it was good for them. They were good for me, and I'm very happy to be at CBS.
Excellent. And Fox is our national news partner. I love Fox News, so I got no problem with Fox. Just wasn't sure if you'd want it mentioned since you're somewhere else.
Yeah. I mean, when I parted, we parted as friends. That's not typical for departures from Fox, but it was for me, and I think it's consistent with what I did for them and what they did for me. So no hard feelings at all, ever.
Excellent. Well, you've been covering the White House for nearly 20 years now, and before we jump into more of your book, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about what it feels like to be in those press briefings now. And, you know, we've seen all the hullabaloo about the CNN guy and all that, but is it as different now as we civilians might guess from watching the news compared to what it was 4 years ago or 10 or 15 years ago? Or is that overplayed?
Sure. No, sure. Believe your eyes. You're seeing what's actually happening. It feels more contentious. It's a little bit, there's more sparring that goes on. It's not as if there hasn't been sparring in the press briefing room before. There certainly was during George W. Bush's time as president over questions about how the war was either progressing or not progressing after the toppling of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. There have been other times during the Nixon administration where the press corps was aggressive. But there's this sort of back and forth. Much of it started by the president, where he attacks the media or fake news, and reporters feel the need emotionally or some other way to respond to it. I try to set all that aside and just do the job, ask the questions, get the answers, and let the American public decide. But, you know, believe your eyes. It looks a little bit different. It feels a little bit different. It has a different atmospherics around it. And, you know, let's not kid ourselves. This is something that everyone wants to watch, the way this Trump White House functions and proceeds on a daily basis. That's why briefings, when they occur, are literally standing room only. I write in the book that I have to get up my seat on the front row 15 minutes before the scheduled time of the briefing, because if I don't, I literally can't swim through the standing room only crowd to get to my seat.
Wow.
So this is something that everyone wants to watch for lots of different reasons.
You know, I know that it is your job to keep your personal politics out of your work as best you can, and you do a great job with it, I have to say. That's not my job, right? I'm an opinion guy.
Of course, right.
And so, and just so you know, not that it's really relevant, I'm a libertarian. So I'm not a partisan Democrat, Republican, any of that. And especially when Jay Carney and Josh Earnest were doing the job that Sarah Sanders is doing now, I found myself sometimes even yelling at the screen, even though I'm not really that sort of guy, or just like, I can't believe that they are willing to say this stuff that are just, everybody knows they're lying. And then it continued with Sean and with Sarah. Everybody knows they're lying. How do you deal with that?
So that's a good question, and I've gotten it more than once. And how you deal with that part really is, and this will almost sound kind of mechanical, maybe even robotic, and if it does, I apologize for that. But look, the way I've always looked at this is I ask the questions, they give the answers, and those who are informed or watching the story closely will make their own judgments about the truthfulness or lack of truthfulness, or if it's just sort of a worn-out, ragged talking point that's far outlived its usefulness. It's not my job to come in and say afterwards what I just said. That's a ragged talking point that's outlived its usefulness. That's not my job. My job is to ask the question, be persistent, get as much news out of the answer as possible, and then let those who are following the story make their own judgments about what they've just heard, how much they believe it, how much they don't believe it. And if there's anything I would say about the tenor of these times, I've found it more important than ever to just stay out of this conversation about what's true or not true, and just ask the questions and let everyone listen carefully to the answers and make their own judgments.
That sounds wise to me. I was wondering how much you plural as a group, the leading reporters there in the press room, do you ever coordinate with each other about what questions you're going to ask? And I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I mean to make sure that the questions that everyone wants to hear actually do get asked.
So I would never use the word coordinate because, A, we're too busy, and B, we're too competitive. But there are clearly times when, if there's like as you said, kind of the persistent and meaningful question of the day or one or two of them, and there's an evasive answer, then other reporters will pick up on the question and keep trying to push and prod. That's not a new thing for the Trump White House. I want to emphasize that. Back when the Obamacare website was crashing, we did the same thing. When there were questions about whether the Obama administration was doing this or that on Iran, there were times when the White House reporters would sort of reinforce one another. Let me go back to that question. Let me push you a little bit harder on that. So it's not a new phenomenon for the Trump presidency, but it does happen, and it usually happens entirely organically. We'll sort of listen, and we'll hear, and we'll pick back up, and that happens. But coordination, far too strong a word. We're all more competitive against each other than to sit around and have some master plan.
And the last thing I want to ask you about working in the press room, and absolutely feel free to say I'd rather not comment. With all this sort of blow up with, between Trump and CNN and Trump and Acosta and all that press pass stuff, do you ever feel like, whether it's him or anybody else in that room, April Ryan comes to mind as well, that they go beyond what you consider to be really professional behavior? Like you think to yourself, even if I felt that way, I just wouldn't do that?
So here's what I've always said about this. Like comedians who don't critique other comedians' jokes, I don't critique other reporters' questions. That's their job. They do it for the organizations they work for, and they live and die by the answers they get. All I ever try to do is get good answers, because that's the reflection of a good question. Not the question, not your deportment. What answer does the public receive from the most powerful political figure in our country? That's what I stand on. That's what I live by.
Makes sense. And it reminds me a little bit of what Dana Perino says when people ask her what she thinks about how Sarah or any of those other folks were doing their job. She said, you know what, I don't critique other press secretaries for similar kinds of reasons to what you said. So you've got a new book out, Mr. Trump's Wild Ride: The Thrills, Chills, Screams, and Occasional Blackouts of an Extraordinary Presidency. There is a heck of a lot to talk about here, but can I just start with asking you about occasional blackouts? Because I'm not through the whole book yet. I just got it. And so what's the occasional blackout, or plural?
Well, so there's a chapter in the book that you might have had a chance to read, 10 Days in May, where I describe a lot of things that transpired. The first of the 10 days in May is the firing of James Comey, and then a lot of things happened after that. And it felt sometimes here at the White House, for those who worked close to the president, those who were covering it, that the news was just coming at us with such velocity, such pace, and such magnitude, it was hard to keep our own balance. And the name of the book, Mr. Trump's Wild Ride, is about this idea, and I write about this in the book, that we're sort of all on this wild ride. We're sort of all holding tight, and you can have a thrill, a scream, a blackout, a chill, and those are value-neutral adjectives. You can be really happy with that experience, or you can be a little traumatized by it. And I think it's fair to say in our country there are lots of people in both camps. And that's why those adjectives are there, to describe what this feels like, but to not describe what it ought to feel like, okay? I don't get into the book about whether you should or should not like this presidency. What I say is it's real, presidential powers matter, and already things have happened because Donald Trump is the President of the United States that are going to be with us 2, 5, 10 years from now.
And as a guy who has to sit behind a microphone also and talk more opinion than deliver news the way you do, it does so often feel like a roller coaster. It is just unbelievable.
And actually, I will tell you, humorously, that's what my publisher wanted to call it. And I said, if you call my book roller coaster, I won't write it, because that is as hackneyed a cliche as you could have in American political conversation. So we came up with something we hope is a little bit more inventive and a little bit more catchy.
One of the points that you make, and this is something that comes up again a lot on this show, is the idea of so many Republicans sort of morphing into people who actually, and this is demonstrated in polls, have more loyalty to Donald Trump than they do to the Republican Party. You talk about how Paul Ryan realized that. Can you elaborate a bit?
Sure. I tell the story about the first post-election rally that now President Trump had. It was in West Allis, Wisconsin, just outside of Milwaukee. Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, running mate of Mitt Romney in 2012, didn't do a single campaign event with Donald Trump in the 2016 campaign. I mean, that's remarkable in of itself. But now he's president, so the Speaker of the House says, I better show up. It's in my state. It's near Milwaukee. I better go. Looks out into the sea of Trump supporters, more than 6,000 or 7,000, roughly, many of whom stood outside in very, very bitter cold weather to see this rally. And I recount in the book the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, telling me, I looked out into that crowd. I've been going to Republican events in Wisconsin for more than 2 decades. And in that crowd, I recognized maybe 10 people. This was a new Republican Party. These were Trump supporters, not necessarily Republicans or Republican stalwarts.
Yeah.
That's an indication of what's beginning to happen to the Republican Party. And maybe that's a great thing. Maybe it's the most transformational and positive thing in the history of the Republican Party. Maybe it's not. Again, I don't weigh in on that. I just say these things are real and worth noting.
Yeah, what I've said about it is that the Republican Party had damaged its own brand a lot and was probably going to have to remake itself. And I think Trump was sort of a catalyst to speed up some kind of change that was required anyway. And again, I realize it's not your job. You're not trying to make those kinds of judgments, but that's what comes to mind when you describe that.
Clearly something has happened. Something has happened. And you can't look at the Trump presidency and say, oh, it's just obviously a one-off. We don't know anything of whether it's a one-off or not. It may be the beginning of a completely redesigned Republican Party. That he's elected tells you something. That he won a nomination over the field of intense competitors that he did tells you something. And I'm really glad you read that one part of the book saying he already matters, probably more than we can currently comprehend. I'm trying to wrap my arms around the story like everybody else. And this book is a journalistic and on-the-record account of trying to make as much sense of it as I could.
Our very special guest, Major Garrett, Chief White House Correspondent for CBS News, author of the new book, Mr. Trump's Wild Ride. Let me jump for a minute to foreign policy stuff in your book, because that's really my background. I majored in basically foreign policy in college, and you've got an interview with Jared Kushner talking about his discussions with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. We call him MBS, and I'm guessing that you got into all of this probably before this huge MBS story blew up.
Long before, yes.
So tell us what you've got and maybe how it plays into how you think about what's happening now.
So for those in your audience who are curious, what is the beginning of this administration's relationship with the Saudi kingdom? How did it get started? Why does it matter? How did it first illustrate itself? You can find all of that in a chapter in the book called Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. And Jared Kushner, in an on-the-record interview with me, described early on in the transition being tasked by President-elect Trump to take on the most important foreign policy conversations. And one of them was with the Saudis, and the Saudis were very eager to establish a new rapport. And so was the Trump administration. Why? Because this administration has made it very clear it wants a counterweight in the region to Iran. And it believes Saudi Arabia is and should be, and that is its dominant priority in the region alongside Israel. And I report in the book something that's pretty well understood, but in the context of the Trump administration, it matters. There's been a noticeable thaw between the Saudis and Israel on this idea that whatever their disagreements are in the past, the biggest agreement they have and the most important issue right in front of them is countering Iran. So all of that folds into the very first trip President Trump takes as president. Where was it? Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. What I write in there is a potentially history-making summit about dealing with terrorism, both financing and ideological recruitment, all the people who were there, all the things that were said. And that really is the foundational beginning of this relationship and the transactions the Saudi government agreed to make with the United States. All of that is part and parcel of the backdrop to this Jamal Khashoggi thing. It's part of the reluctance the president has to push away the Saudi kingdom and the crown prince. He certainly acknowledges this is a horrific crime. It shouldn't have happened. It's a botched cover-up. But does that mean this counterweight has to be given up? He doesn't want to do that. And that's part of this struggle that's going on. And if you sort of want to get a sense of how this all got started, I would commend that chapter in the book.
And my take, again, Garrett, I don't know why Major Garrett is our special guest, chief White House correspondent for CBS News. I keep coming back to this idea that the Trump administration could basically say what you said, and they don't need to go out there and lie and say, we don't know that MBS was involved. They lie when the truth will do, and that's what bothers me so much about this story, because it is clearly a really difficult situation, a very important relationship, a terrible crime committed by the guy leading that country. I mean, this is why a president of the United States is president. You got to make these hard decisions, but they could just tell the truth about it, and I think the public would be okay with it.
Right. They could say, and I'm not recommending this, I don't give advice to any president I've ever covered, but they could say, look, this is terrible, and there's probably complicity here, and we are going to carry that message to the Crown Prince, the heir apparent. But that doesn't mean that this is going to sever our relationship, because we have to make priorities. And priorities are tough in life. And as Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, says, it's a nasty world out there, very dangerous. And the president could say, these two things can be true at the same time. And I have to make priorities, hard priorities, stomach-churning priorities, but I've made it, and that's it. He could say that.
That's
Whether
exactly
he does or not, I don't know, but as to your point, he could say that.
Okay, I've got 30 seconds left. My producer, Shannon, has something of a crush on Heather Nauert. I wanted to get your opinion of the possibility of Heather Nauert becoming the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
Well, we expect the president to formally make that announcement today. The Senate confirmation with 53 Republicans won't be easy, but it will be happening. What will be interesting about that position is if it's full cabinet like Nikki Haley was, there's some sense that it won't be, and that her visibility might not be as pronounced as Nikki Haley's was.
Very interesting. Major Garrett, chief White House correspondent for CBS News. Everyone go buy his new book, Mr. Trump's Wild Ride. Major, great to talk to you for the first time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I hope we can do it again.
We will. Thank you. We'll be right back.
It is sponsored by Staples.
Heavier highways and some more problems. Commerce City area, latest trouble spot, westbound 270 approaching Vasquez. That's an accident. Running solid from I-70 up to Vasquez. Get to the right side of the highway. That eastbound side heavier, I-76 over to York. Delays in heavy traffic downtown, southbound I-25. An accident near 6th Avenue, that's gone. The ramp from eastbound 6 to southbound I-25 backed up. Eastbound 6th Avenue at Wadsworth had a huge accident. That is gone, and the highway reopened. Then the forecast today, partly sunny with a high near 40 degrees, partly cloudy tonight, low 20, and 44 tomorrow. Right now, 20 degrees. For the traffic and weather, I'm Susan Thielen, 630 KHAL.
Staples has stress-free holiday shipping and all the supplies you need 7 days a week, so gifts arrive on time. Plus, get 15% off UPS shipping services and shipping supplies. See what's in store this holiday at Staples. Exclusion supply in-store only. Offer ends 12/29. See associate for details.
I had asked a friend of mine if he could do something with me this morning, actually go over to the gun club at a particular time, and he said, I can't because I'm taking your advice and getting over to Rocky Mountain Men's Clinic. And I thought, excellent. I mean, look, I don't need to know what's going on in everybody's life, but if you're dealing with, sexual performance issues that can really be messing up your enjoyment of life, it's that simple, right? Your enjoyment of life. Your ability to have a relationship, your ability to have kids, your ability to go out and date somebody. And you want help because you don't want to just sit there and suffer alone, right? You go to Rocky Mountain Men's Clinic. They have helped thousands and thousands of men over a couple of decades. They can help you too. Of course, they're in Denver and they're in the Springs, but they also have a new location in Castle Rock. So if you get in touch, they will find a time and a place to help you soon. I want you to learn more at RockyMountainMen'sClinic.com.
When the deadline clock is ticking, an unreliable network can cost your business money. That's why you need Comcast Business. Our gig speed network is fast, and we go beyond fast with the complete reliability of 4G LTE backup, which means that even if something like construction accidentally knocks out the power, you can still upload that big presentation, email important clients, invoice customers, and not take a hit to your company's bottom line. For a limited time, switch to Comcast Business and get an amazing deal. Get fast, reliable internet at any speed and add voice for only $24.95 more per month for 2 years. Just one more way Comcast Business goes beyond other providers. Call 1-800-501-6000 today. Comcast Business. Beyond fast.
Offer ends 12/31/18. Restrictions apply. Not available in all areas. Limited to one voice line and available only to new Comcast business customers. Early termination fee applies. Equipment taxes and fees